So the question I got the most after the barstool video was all about these templates. They were really interested to know how I had these cut and why I didn't just cut them by hand. I had them cut on a CNC machine because I had 6 or 7 templates to make, and it was just a whole lot faster since I have limited time out here in the shop. We're going to start this process in SketchUp, where I'm going to show you how to take the face of one of your components, export it to an SVG file, and then print it out to take out to the shop. Okay, so we're going to start here in SketchUp. This is the barstool file. I got a couple of pieces open, but I just selected the side apron as the piece I'm going to use as an example. So what you're going to do is double click it to unlock the component. And this is the face that I want to make a template because it's got the curve on the top and the bottom. Before I continue, I just wanted to mention that the extension that I'm using is called Face SVG, and I'll put a link in the description below. So what I'm going to do is right click it, hover over Face SVG, and then click Layout SVG Profile. So this is the piece over here, this 2D component. So you can right click it, Face SVG, Write SVG Profile, and all this is going to do is save this as an SVG file to your computer, and I'm just going to save it in here as Sample Apron. So we need to convert that SVG file to a PDF, so go to Google and search for SVG to PDF or your favorite search engine. And this is going to bring up a site called cloudconvert.com. I have no affiliation with this site. It's just a site that I found that worked. I click Select Files, and then I'm going to choose a sampleapron.svg, and it's going to be a PDF file. Come down here and click Start Conversion, and it completed. So you can download it, and then I'm going to open it in Acrobat. So now we're going to print this. So I'm going to go to File, Print in Acrobat, and I'm on a Mac, so I changed the page scaling to Tile All Pages, and I selected the cut marks, and what that's going to do is put the little crosshairs on the pages. It's going to make it a little bit easier to line up out in the shop. If you're on a Windows machine, this is what you're going to see. These are the Acrobat settings. So the page sizing and handling, you want to choose poster, and again, you want to choose the cut marks to put the crosshairs on the page. So with this right here, just click print, and it should print out. We can head out to the shop. So we got the paper printed off. We're going to work on that here in just a minute, but I wanted to talk about the material that I use. I like to use 1/4 inch MDF or plywood. I just happen to have some MDF here for my templates, and it's thick enough that it will ride along that bearing just fine, and it's not too thick that where it's going to take a long time to remove the waste. If you have 1/8 inch, I often find that the flush trim bits that I've seen have a space from the top of the cutter head to the bottom of the bearing, and sometimes that 1/8 inch plywood can slide under that bearing and cause an issue. So I like to use 1/4 inch to make my templates. So that's what I'm going to be using for this. And to begin, what I do is I look at the width of the apron that I'm cutting, and it's 2 1/4, I believe. So what I'm going to do is go over to the table saw and cut a piece of 2 1/4 inch wide MDF. That's a little bit longer than the length of the template because this one has angles on the end. So let's go ahead and get started. I begin by finding a scrap piece of MDF and cutting it to the width of the paper template at the table saw. Next, I determine the length of the template and cut the MDF to that length. I begin by cleaning up one edge and then placing it up against the stop block. This ensures that both ends are 90 degrees. With the MDF good to go, I can now begin cutting out the paper template. I like to start by taping the 2 pieces together. Now I know that I mentioned in the Acrobat clip just a second ago that the cut marks will put crosshairs on the paper, but I printed this out on a different machine, so if you choose the cut marks options, you will have those on your paper. To remove the waste above and below the template, I use a straight edge and place that at the tip on both ends, and then using a sharper marking knife, I remove the excess paper. Same goes for the ends of the template. To glue the template to the MDF, I like to use spray adhesive. After a few minutes, the adhesive is tacked up a bit. I place the paper template on the MDF and make sure that the ends are lined up before putting any pressure on it. Before I cut any of the curves, I always cut the angles on the ends. This makes the process easier because I can rest the board up against the fence and not have to worry about the curve throwing the angle off. Now we can start the shaping process, and that begins at the bandsaw. Like I say in all of my videos, I remove the waste, staying roughly 1/8 of an inch away from the line. I really don't want to have to cut another template or start over, so let's take it slow. Here's a neat trick. If for some reason your template has too much waste left on the board, you can simply scrape it across the blade, and the blade will slowly remove the waste. Sometimes this is easier if you only have a little bit of waste to remove, but be careful and keep your hands away from the blade. With the template close to the final shape, I next head over to the spindle sander. Since the sander comes with multiple spindles, I find the spindle that is the largest diameter that will fit in the curve. The larger the spindle you can fit in your curve, the less bumps you will have to remove later.
When using the spindle sander, don't put a lot of pressure, which will cause the spindle to dig into the template. This is going to cause a lot of lumps. Just light, consistent pressure throughout the length of the template. It may look like I'm not removing much waste, but the sander's not removing the paper from the template. It's just folding it upwards, so I will often flip the template over to look at the overall shape. I'll continue this process on the other edge of the template. The final step is to do some hand sanding. These are the flexible sanding pads that are made up of 3/16" MDF and a scrap piece of wood glued to both ends. If you flip them over, you'll notice a half sheet of sandpaper. I like to keep one with 120 grit and the other one with 150 grit. I wanted to mention that I learned about the flexible sanding pads from Mark at the Wood Whisperer. These are extremely handy and have made the process of making curved templates so much more consistent. To use the flexible sanding pads, I begin by drawing a line on the MDF to gauge my progress. While pushing down on the sanding pad, I slowly work back and forth until the pencil marks are gone. This lets me know that there are no low spots on the templates, as you can see here. Now that I've made the template, let's use it. I've got a scrap piece of oak that is 2 1/4 inches wide, and I place double-sided tape on the face, and carefully lining up the MDF template, I put pressure on the template to activate the tape. Since I'm only doing a one-off template, I will leave the template taped to the board and remove the waste from the bandsaw. If I had multiple templates to make, I would trace the shape from the template onto the board and then use that as my guide at the bandsaw.
So these are the 3 flush trim bits that I keep in my shop. This one is a 1/4 inch shank, so I can use it in my trim router. It has a bearing on the top and the bottom, and the cutter length is about 1 inch. So that means if I run into some grain that switches direction, I can flip it over and reference this bottom bearing. Again, this just has a straight cutter, and just like the smaller one, this has a straight cutter as well, and the length is 2 inches on this one, and the bearing is on the top. And the final one that I have on hand is a upcut flush spiral trim bit, and that's kind of a mouthful, but as you can see, it cuts on the diagonal and it does a shearing action, so that's going to leave a really clean cut. Because I used this on the bar stools where the template overlapped end grain, and this removed that no problem at all. So if I have a lot of flush trim work to do and the grain is switching directions, I'm going to put this in the router table, and that's going to give me a clean cut. But if I'm just doing some aprons like this where there's not a lot of waste to remove and there's no end grain, I have no problem sticking one of these in because it's going to do an okay job, but these just won't stay sharp as long as something like this. Now granted, this is $93 to $95 versus $25 and probably $20 as well. So you really have to determine what kind of work are you going to be doing, how much of it, is there end grain, and if so, I recommend something like this because it's going to last you a whole lot longer than these bits, and it's going to leave a very clean surface, which means less cleanup, and you can move on with the project. But again, it's rather expensive, so weigh your options to determine what type of bit that you want to get. But these are the ones that I keep in my shop.
I line up the bit so that the majority of the bearing is on the MDF template, but I also make sure that the cutter is high enough to cut the entire thickness of the board. The final step is to install the starter pin, and this allows me to pivot the workpiece into the bit, making it a safer operation since I can't use my fence. Using my push pads, I pivot the piece into the bit and then slowly remove the waste. I rotate the board and repeat the same steps. And as you can see, we now have an exact copy of our template. The spiral bit leaves a very smooth surface that's almost finish ready.
So as you can see, it's not real tough to make these. The only thing you have to ask yourself is, do I have enough shop time to make these? And what I save, is it worth saving the money to have these cut on a CNC machine? Because that took me about an hour to make this, including filming it. I mean, that's just a simple apron. You've got things like this rear leg that have curves here, up by the backrest, and then you got these straight stretches on the bottom. I mean, those are pretty tough to make and make them look straight, even though if you do them by hand, that you're probably not going to get them exactly straight. Then you flip it over, you got more curves. So that's just one rear leg. That would have taken me probably an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then you've got the riser block that has the curves on the corners and underneath. I mean, you get the point. There's just template piece after template piece after template piece. So this would have taken me well over a week to make, since I only work out here after work about an hour a night. And this saved me so much time, and it brought the precision and accuracy of a CNC to my shop, because this is perfect. This, although really close, if you were to, look at it at a certain angle, I guarantee you it's not perfect, but it's close enough. If you're just making a one-off little apron, do it by hand, it's close enough. But if you have to batch these out, a CNC for me was a no-brainer. So I hope you enjoyed these little videos, the little how-to videos. I've got a couple more lined up that I think you'll enjoy. But if you have any questions about this whole process, leave a comment below. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and share it with a friend that you think would enjoy this or learn a thing or two from it. But I appreciate you guys watching. I'll see you in the next video.